So we have already covered the Radiant based spells. Now we're going to go over the Inferno spells. Now these ones aren't the most user friendly because you end up getting a lot of these spells towards the end of the game, or bosses that are towards the end of the game, which can be kind of annoying. But the spells themselves actually do perform really well. But for today, we're going to go ahead and talk about all 20 of them and then rank them from worst to best and put them in tiers as well, because that's just what we do. As always, please do like and subscribe, and do let me know down below if you want me to go over the Umbral based spells as well. Anyway, let's get into it. Starting off at the bottom, we have Adir's Vengeance. Now this spell does a little AoE attack for about 26 mana, of which actually does debuff enemies to make them take a little bit of damage over time. And by I mean a little bit of damage, I literally mean a little bit of damage. Sometimes it can just take for like 1 or 2 damage every single time, which is just not that good at all. But the catch is that when you do kill the enemy, when they are debuffed, they do in fact explode. Now, the reason as to why this sucks is because the debuff only lasts 10 seconds, so you can only have 10 seconds to actually kill the enemy, and the explosion itself is just not that good. It doesn't really do good damage, it has a small little AoE, and it doesn't even explode straight away as well. It takes like a few seconds for it to come out. I'm not sure if there's anything that I'm missing about this spell. Maybe there is. If you guys know something that I don't, please let me know down in the comments. But as it is right now, it's a very disappointing spell that you get off a very disappointing boss. Number 19, we have Infernal Hounds. Now this spell has so many downsides, it's not even funny. But basically this spell summons 3 different dogs of which breathe fire towards a particular enemy. Now sometimes it doesn't even summon 3 dogs, because depending on the terrain or if you're in narrow corridors, it only summons 1 dog sometimes. And of which that dog is just not going to do good damage at all. Even if all 3 dogs are breathing fire, the damage is still not even that great. The range isn't even that good as well. The dogs don't really move around to chase an enemy, nor do they actually have a health bar and actually take aggro away from an enemy as well. And for 79 mana, there's plenty of other spells that just do way more damage for this. And the downsides don't even stop there. You can only use 1 at a time. If you cast it, you have to wait for the animations for the dogs to just completely go away before you can cast it again. You can't even get your health back when you're in the withered state. When you take wither damage and you do damage back, you can actually get that health back. But with this spell, that doesn't even work. So yeah, there's like not much I can actually say positive about this spell at all. Number 18, we have Flame Funnel. Now this spell actually does summon a fire tornado that encompasses the player, of which when you hold on to the input, it will just make it last as long as you want and actually drain mana over time. Now the mana drain is actually roughly about 30 mana per second, which I guess isn't too bad, but unfortunately the damage is just not worth it at all. Now the AoE is nice, so it can hit multiple players or enemies at once, and with how short range it is as well, you're just going to get staggered straight out of it because you just don't get any hyper armor or poise when casting this thing. I wish that you did. It'll probably make it a little bit better at least, because at the moment it's just not that viable. There are other spells that just kind of work similar, as we'll get into, that just perform way better than this one. But it's funny how like the 2 spells you actually get of one of the final bosses in the game are just very bad. Number 17, we have Adir's Authority. Now this spell for 26 mana actually does knock enemies backwards in a shockwave attack and do a little bit of damage. Now the damage itself is definitely not that great, so I guess its only use is to just knock enemies backwards. Now unfortunately this is only going to work for like smaller types of enemies, so when you are surrounded by those, I guess using this spell can actually like help set you free, I guess. Or if you want to like ledge kill people in PvP, it might have a use there as well. But using this as a damage option is definitely not viable, especially for 26 mana. I don't know why this spell's basically only use is to knock enemies backwards, and it costs 26 mana, unless there's something that I'm missing. If there is, please let me know down in the comments. But I feel like this thing should consume way less mana than what it actually does right now. Number 16, we have Infernal Guardian. Now this spell actually summons a little fire turret, of which actually shoots these homing firebolts towards an enemy, and it will also cause that burn buildup as well. Now the damage itself is just not that great, and the projectiles shoot at like 1 at a time very slowly. Now I guess its only use is to be able to have that passive damage over time and do damage yourself. But for 52 mana, there are things that just perform way better than this. Now I know some people actually like to use this thing in PvP, but you know, PvE based list, so I can't really take that into account. But for me personally, I feel like this thing should just be firing out like twice as fast and twice as many projectiles, because for only like 5 projectiles that travel pretty slow and don't do that much damage, I don't really consider it to be that good. Number 15, we have Severing Blades. Now this spell for 46 mana actually does shoot out a wave projectile that can go relatively far, do some okay damage, and actually is a pretty quick cast as well, which is definitely the best part about it. Now unfortunately this spell is just inconsistent beyond all belief, because there's plenty of times we're in tight corridors and it just like clips something and just does no damage, doesn't even reach the target itself. And for a horizontal spread, you think it would actually, you know, hit multiple enemies at once, but no, doesn't really work that. As soon as it hits one target, it just dissipates and stops. I wish actually it just went through enemies and actually hits multiple enemies at once, because I feel like that would be the best use for this thing, as like as a multi-hit target type of spell, because as a singular target spell, there are other spells that just do way more damage than this and are a lot more consistent. But if that has made this spell just go through enemies, it would be a lot better. Number 14, we have Infernal Orb. Now this is like the basic generic fireball that you actually end up starting with. Very easy to use projectile that goes relatively far. Does only consume 13 mana as well. Now, obviously, the damage is not going to be anywhere near as good as some of the other things you will see on this list, but the fact that it is very mana efficient does actually have a very specific use. Because if you did check out my Radiant ranking video, I actually really valued the smaller projectile. But the reason why this one's not going to get high like it did with the Radiant type of spell is because there are actually other spells that are very mana efficient as well. But if you did have a build that didn't really utilize a lot of mana regen type of spells, this one could honestly be your best bet because it is very cheap, only 13 mana, goes far, can do okay damage. But if you are going into like a predominant spell casting type of build, this one's probably not it for you. Number 13, we have Infernal Decree. Now this spell for 39 mana actually does rain down a whole bunch of swords from the sky in a relatively larger AoE, so actually can hit multiple enemies at once pretty easily. And swords do constantly keep raining down over and over again, so the total overall damage can actually be very good, especially for only 39 mana cost. Now the problem with this spell is that it's only going to be good against immobile type of enemies because you only really benefit if all those swords end up hitting over and over again, because as soon as an enemy takes like a few steps forward or backwards, that is going to end up dodging the projectile. And another annoying thing is that it doesn't really go where you lock onto sometimes, especially when they're closer towards you. It would always end up defaulting to go to a certain distance and stay there. I don't know why this doesn't go wherever you want to lock on. If it did do that, it would end up being a lot better. But at least you actually can use multiple at the exact same time. So you can just like litter the entire arena with just a bunch of just raining swords, which actually is pretty cool. But in my opinion, there are other types of AoE spells that just perform a lot better and are a lot more consistent as well. Number 12, we have Pyroclastic Stone. Now this spell is definitely going to be one of the better mana to damage ratio spells in the entire game because with 52 mana, you can actually send out this bouncing ball that upon impact can actually explode, do some nice damage, and actually leave a cool lava pool on the ground. Now, unfortunately, when it makes direct impact with an enemy, the lava pool doesn't actually appear for whatever reason. It only actually appears when it hits the ground, which is very unfortunate. It'll be a lot better if it has summoned that lava pool on impact. Now, the reason as to why this is going to get lower on the list is because, one, there's a spell that you will see later on, Magma Surge, that does the exact same thing as this does, but probably just better. Because this thing is kind of inconsistent against smaller enemies. Sometimes it'll just bounce over their head. But when it's like a slower projectile, enemies can just move and dodge it as well. And it doesn't really go that far. But it is still a very decent spell. If you use it, you'll find plenty of success because the damage is still really good and it doesn't really consume much mana as well. Number 11, we have Infernal Eruption. Now, this spell is actually a short-ranged AoE, which works very similar to Conflagration, which is just like a Fire Surge attack. But the differences being is that this one actually does 60% more damage, but it consumes way more than twice the amount of mana, which makes it not really worth it in my opinion, because this thing consumes 60 mana per second compared to Conflagration's 25. And another annoying thing about this is that it has less range. For whatever reason, it just has like a curving effect to where it feels like it has like roughly half the amount of range. So you have to be very, very close to benefit off this spell, which makes it very risky because obviously you get staggered very easily in this game. But it does have that specific use because obviously it does that higher DPS. And if you are at point blank range, it actually can melt a whole bunch of enemies really quickly. So if you do have plenty of mana to spare, this one might be the better option. But I would only really use these type of spells to like kill trash mobs very quickly, of which I would just rather go with the mana efficient based one in Conflagration, but this spell is still pretty decent. Number 10, we have Cataclysm. Now this spell does a fuck ton of damage. I mean like a lot of damage in one hit. Now unfortunately, the reason why it's not going to get higher is because I think there's other things that we'll see on this list that just directly outclass it. Because this thing actually does consume the most mana at 99 compared to all the other spells. And it doesn't really do that much more damage than some of the other things you will see. In fact, there are other spells that actually might do more damage for less. But this thing actually has a relatively quick animation, does summon a whole bunch of meteors to fall from the sky. And it can perform very nicely. Now the problems with it is that at very close distances, it just sometimes doesn't hit. It will go straight over their head. And it doesn't have that much range. So at further distances, you're not going to really benefit much as well. And this thing is only going to really be useful as a single target damage because it doesn't really hit multiple enemies at once. I wish I had like more of a horizontal spread, but it doesn't really have that because there are other spells that you'll see in this list that can do almost just as much damage for less mana and actually work as an AoE spell as well. But this spell is still really good. It's just outclassed in my opinion. Number 9, we have Infernal Slash. Now, this spell can actually get some very decent DPS because it's a very short range attack that only consumes 39 mana and you can cast it very quickly. Now, there are going to be other spells that obviously are going to be more efficient in terms of their mana cost because the damage per hit of this thingy isn't going to be that amazing. But the biggest plus for this is that it can attack very, very quickly. So if you have plenty of mana and you have a build that's doing a decent amount of damage with your Inferno spells, using this thing will definitely shred a whole bunch of enemies really quickly. But obvious reasons as to why it's not going to get high is, as I just mentioned, the total overall damage is not going to be that great. And it is a very short range attack. You have to be pretty much at point blank range, which obviously means it's going to be more risky. Number 8, we have Conflagration. Now, as I was mentioning with the Infernal Eruption spell, this one is going to be your short range AoE, of which actually does have a little bit more range than Infernal Eruption. But this one is going to do a little bit less damage, but be a lot more mana efficient. When you hold onto the button, it would actually only consume about 25 mana per second from my testing compared to the Infernal Eruption 60. But the reason as to why this spell is actually decent is because it's going to be the best spell to just kill trash mobs very quickly because one, it can go through enemies, can do some okay damage, is a quicker cast, and you can just end the animation whenever you want to by just letting go of the button, so therefore it's actually a lot less risky as well compared to some of the other spells. And it's pretty cheap as well. So when it comes to killing trash mobs, this one's just going to be the best option. Number 7, we have Magma Surge. Now this spell for 66 mana actually summons this big giant explosion from the sky, come crash into the ground, have a decent AoE, and actually leave a lava pool alongside the ground as well to just make enemies take even more damage. So this thing can probably get the highest total overall damage in the entire game and get some of the best DPS as well, because you can cast it over and over again. Now the reason as to why it's not going to get higher is because against more mobile enemies that like to move around a whole bunch, it's very hard to hit because the explosion doesn't really come down straight away, so they can dodge it pretty easily. But against slower or more immobile types of enemies, this one is probably going to be the best spell to use because it has very good range. You can just sit at the back of the map and just keep spamming it over and over again, which for 66 mana you definitely can do. And it can be one of the better damaging type spells, but even against crowd control, being that it has like a pretty decent explosion, it actually is good at killing multiple enemies as well. So yeah, in my opinion, this spell is just a must-have. At number 6, we have Adir's Hardness. Now this bad boy just gives you a bunch of damage negation for 90 seconds. Now for my testing, it's about 25% more damage negation, which is honestly really good. And for only 60 mana, it is definitely worth it. But the thing that actually makes it the most broken to me is that it only has an 8 Inferno requirement. So basically what you can do is just throw on any random Inferno catalyst, use the spell, and you can actually just switch it off and you actually still retain the buff as well, which is just honestly insane to me. So you don't even need to have an Inferno spell to benefit off this. And the funny thing is, it actually stacks with other types of buffs as well. So the fact that you can just get 25% damage negation with any type of build, yeah, it's kind of insane. Now, while we're on the same trend, we might as well talk about Adir's Endurance at number 5, because this thing is another buff, of which actually does give you a bunch of stamina regeneration speed. Now, stamina regeneration in this game can be kind of annoying to actually deal with, because for the most part, it actually can be pretty slow, which actually does hurt your DPS. But with this bad boy right here, oh my god, I have no idea what they were thinking, but it is boosted by so much. I don't know what the actual percentage is, but it's definitely more than like 3 times the amount. And you could even be using like a fat rolling build with a heavy load that has like terrible stamina regeneration speed, put on Adir's Endurance, and for 90 seconds, you just have insane regeneration speed, which obviously this is amazing because it's going to result in just probably more total overall damage, constant aggression, so you can just keep on dodging and attacking at the exact same time. And once again, this thing only has an 8 Inferno requirement, of which you can just put on a random Inferno catalyst, use a spell, and you can actually just remove the spell as well, and actually still retain the buff. And it does stack with the other spells like Adir's Hardness. So yeah, this thing is just cracked. Number 4, we have Lava Burst. Now this is not the most like flashy or amazing spell, but I feel like you just always need to have at least like one generic projectile on, because being able to just kill enemies at a distance for very cheap, it's always going to be very nice, and Lava Burst does it extremely well. Now this thing is just the upgraded version of Infernal Orb. Now unfortunately, this thing actually does consume twice as much mana, and it actually is going to be a slower cast as well. So you probably end up getting more total overall damage with Infernal Orb, but the reason why I'm still going to prefer this one a lot more is because obviously the damage is almost twice the amount, so it kind of makes it worth it and almost balanced in terms of the DPS department, and it actually gets a very nice AoE to where it explodes and actually hits multiple enemies at once very easily, whereas Infernal Orb only really hits like one enemy at a time. So the fact that you can get like really good range, a really solid AoE, decent damage, pretty cheap cost as well, I think it's just pretty good. Number 3, we have Infernal Weapon, which this is just going to be a weapon buff. This adds more fire damage to your weapon, which can just obviously just do a bunch more damage and just more burn buildup as well. Now this is just going to be amazing, especially in a game where like weapons are just going to be your primary source of damage, because it's having a bunch more damage for 90 seconds for only 60 mana cost is always going to be really nice. Doesn't matter if you have a primary caster build or you have a hybrid build, you're still going to benefit greatly by having this on. At number 2, we have Adir's Rage. Now this build actually does boost your physical and fire damage. From my testing, it was roughly about 10%. Now the description itself says that it only boosts your physical damage, but I tested it out alongside with the fire-based spells, and it boosted the damage with those as well, so I don't know what's going on there. But the fact that it does boost your fire and physical damage means that it's going to pair very nicely alongside an Inferno type build, because it also lasts 90 seconds. So you can basically just have 10% more damage throughout the majority of the boss fight. You should just always have this on for every single boss, because there is nothing wrong with 10% more damage. And even if you have a catalyst that doesn't have many spell slots, you could just equip Adir's Rage, use the spell, and just remove it, and you'll still retain the buff as well. Which is definitely a W thing that this game actually did. Being able to like interchange spells in the middle of combat is just amazing. So yeah, that's the reason why Adir's Rage gets number 2. Number 1, we have Seismic Slam, the only spell that you actually really need to worry about. Everything else in this list is irrelevant. Just have this spell and you're perfectly fine, because basically this is the fuck shit up spell. You click the button and it just fucks shit up. I don't know what they were thinking when making this, but clearly they were just like, what if we just made a spell that had like amazing range, did ridiculous damage, quick cast, only consumes 66 mana, can go through enemies, have a decent AoE, and get some burn buildup. And it was like, yeah, that's a great idea. We should totally do that. And then behold, this thing is made, which honestly, I'm here for it. I love this shit. I love broken stuff. It's fun. But yeah, I'm pretty sure I don't have to explain how the spell works. The gameplay is pretty much speaking for itself. It's just doing a lot of damage. That's like all you gotta know. But if I were to explain it, what I think is going on is that it's spewing out a bunch of different geysers, and at a distance, it just ends up hitting multiple times. It doesn't really perform as well at close range, which I guess is perfectly fine because being at a longer distance is where you want to be anyway. But yeah, as soon as you get your hands on this spell, which you actually do acquire off the prisoner quest line, I think it's like the second part of the quest line, just chuck this bad boy on and you'll have a great time. Anyway, that pretty much concludes it for this one. As always, please do like and subscribe. I'm not sure if even saying like and subscribe actually means anything, but I'm gonna say it anyway. And do let me know down in the comments if you want to see the Umbral spells ranked next. And if you have your own findings or anything that you do disagree with, just let me know down in the comments. Anyway, see you guys in the next one. Bye.